crazy.
Brett Huntley, David Braden, John Chen, Tom Brokaw.
How to help. An emergency summit of world leaders trying to figure out the best way to help tsunami victims as relief workers scramble to move aid, and aftershocks still rattle this region. Desperate measures, officials shutting off the water supply to try to prevent disease, and field doctors making it up as they go in a race to save lives. Hot seat. The president's nominee for attorney general says no to the torture of terror suspects as he faces tough questions in his nomination hearing. Protesting the vote, Congress forced to interrupt its ceremonial counting of the electoral votes because of problems on Election Day in Ohio. And the sixth sense. When the giant wave hit, most of the animals were already heading for the hills. The scientific reasons why.
This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, reporting tonight from Singapore.
And good evening tonight from Singapore, the nation that has now been established as a bridge to the relief effort going on to the west of here. This will be the hub for restoration of all the damaged areas, and already that activity is highly visible here. Because of the busy port, materials can come in and get loaded onto military C-130 aircraft, and then organizations like the International Red Cross can take it from there to the very hardest hit regions. And in this disaster zone, a regional summit in Jakarta topping our news of this day. Among the leaders at the hastily called gathering, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell, fresh from his own tour of the destruction.
I think that we were able to bring the international community together.
Improvement at relief flights. We have experienced several substantial aftershocks since arriving in this region, including 2 just last night. One of them today was captured on camera when our colleague Kevin Seitz was preparing to report live for MSNBC in front of the now familiar collapsed shopping mall in the downtown section of Banda Aceh.
Major earthquake. People are scattering. More of the debris is coming down.
That on-air moment from one of the many aftershocks here in this region. We have been concentrating, understandably, on the staggering death toll in this crisis, but the number of injured is equally staggering. On this day 11 of the crisis, they are still arriving for treatment at field hospitals, the real-life MASH units across this region, where they are cared for by doctors who already have their hands full. Day 11, and Banda Aceh remains in full crisis. This field hospital, the one visited by visit to Indonesia. These are some of the lucky ones, the survivors of the tsunamis being brought here for treatment. They're just in off helicopters from a hard-hit section of coastline 120 miles from here. The children we saw.
And I think that's a good thing.
As we have been mentioning, with the death toll hovering around 150,000, there are fears the number could double because of rampant disease in this region. The fear of that has triggered some desperate measures in some places. That story tonight from NBC's Ned Colt.
Some smiles after the heart patient units and medical kits to hardest hit areas. Today, U.S. Senators Mary Landrieu and Bill Frist brought in American aid. Frist is a doctor who's well aware of potential long-term health problems ahead.
It is really just beginning.
To make sure one natural catastrophe.
There is word tonight of a late development at the Pentagon tonight. Our correspondent, NBC's Jim Miklaszewski.
Brian, tragic news tonight out of Iraq. 7 U.S. soldiers were killed when their Bradley fighting vehicle struck a roadside bomb in Baghdad. And for the first time, a senior Army official warns tonight the U.S. Army needs more troops to fight the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and future conflicts. If not, the very future of the military's all-volunteer force could be at risk. The number of U.S. troops in Iraq could remain at about the current level for the next 4 to 5 years. Jim Miklaszewski, NBC News, the Pentagon.
The topic of Iraq was looming in the background in Washington today as the president's choice for Attorney General, his White House lawyer Alberto Gonzales, started his confirmation hearings with questions about U.S. torture policy and the treatment of terror suspects. Here is NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams.
Alberto Gonzalez came to Congress eager to emphasize that he's against torture and that he and the president condemn the abuse.
Share his resolve that torture and abuse will not be tolerated by this administration, and commit to you today that if confirmed, I will ensure that the Department of Justice aggressively pursues those responsible for such abhorrent actions.
But Senate Democrats pressed him on how independent Gonzalez would be from the president he has served so long. It's a virtual certainty he will be confirmed. Pete Williams, NBC News at the Justice Department.
And we will have more from this region later on in the broadcast after an update on the rest of the day's news from my colleague Campbell Brown in New York. When Nightly News continues, on Capitol Hill, something that's only happened once before since 1877. The official count of the presidential vote interrupted. Why the protest? And later, when the wave came and the animals were already gone, how did the creatures know instinctively that danger was coming?
Dateline Friday, the tsunami disaster, undiscovered areas of destruction. Plus, it's happened in America before. Could it happen again? And Andrea Yates, convicted of murdering her children. Now the verdict has been overturned. Reaction to this stunning twist. Dateline Friday, 8/7 Central on NBC.
Monday, girl, but her dream to play football nearly shattered by members of her own team.
He raped you.
A Katie Couric exclusive, only on Today.
NBC News in depth tonight. One more installment in our election series, making your vote count. On Capitol Hill, today was the day of the ceremonial counting of the electoral vote, which President Bush won. But the count was interrupted by a protest over voting problems in Ohio on Election Day. Will it make any difference in how people vote next time? In depth tonight, here's NBC's Chip Reed.
It's an elaborate ceremony repeated every 4 years.
Mr. Speaker, the Vice President, and the United States Senate.
The votes of the Electoral College carried into a joint session of Congress where they are certified.
The certificate of electoral vote of the state of Idaho.
And the winner of the presidential election is routinely made official.
For what purpose does the member from Ohio rise?
But today, a handful of Democrats objected to certifying the vote of Ohio, sending the senators back to their side of the Capitol under a rarely used law that requires full debate if at least one member of each house objects. The objectors cited irregularities in Ohio, from alleged intimidation of minority voters to too few voting machines.
If they are willing to stand at polls for countless hours in the rain, as many did in Ohio, then I should surely stand up for them here in the halls of Congress.
So many voters were disenfranchised, they said, that the Ohio vote and the result of the presidential election are still in doubt. Republicans called those charges wild, incoherent, and completely unsubstantiated.
Those who claim that Ohio's votes were rigged have produced nothing that approaches credible evidence.
Even the election of 2000 with the debacle in Florida didn't cause this kind of debate in Congress. The losing candidate then, Vice President Al Gore, refused to object.
And it's a sad day in America, Mr. President, when we can't find a senator to sign the objections.
Gentleman will suspend.
Today, Senator John Kerry didn't object. He was in Iraq. In the end, only one senator, Democrat Barbara Boxer of California, and 31 Democrats in the House voted against certifying the Ohio vote. And late today, George W. Bush was declared the official winner.
The Democrats who forced this unusual debate say they did not even hope to change the election result. Their purpose, they say, was only to draw attention to the need for election reform. Chip Reed, NBC News, the Capitol.
Up next, a courtroom shocker. The woman who drowned her 5 children, Andrea Yates, has her murder conviction overturned. News about 2 major airlines. Today, the nation's largest carrier, American, matched the big changes made by Delta. American lowered its highest coach and first-class fares, reduced prices for last-minute domestic tickets, and simplified its overall fare structure. American also followed Delta in eliminating those Saturday night stayover requirements. And a federal bankruptcy judge granted U.S. Airways' request to cancel its collective bargaining agreement with the Machinists Union if the rank and file do not quickly agree to concessions. The move could prevent the airline's shutdown, but cost union workers part of their salaries and, in some cases, their jobs. A shocking turn today in a notorious murder case. A Texas appeals court overturned Andrea Yates' murder conviction for drowning her children. Here's NBC's Mike Kirsch.
Hello, John.
On Wall Street today, the blue chips managed to close on the upside for the first time this year. The Dow finished up 25 points, but the Nasdaq was down again just over 1 point. And when we come back, more from Brian Williams and the tsunami disaster zone, including a look at how the animals there seemed to know the wave was coming.
NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, brought to you in part by Aflac. Ask about it at work.
From the Great Plains to our grand cities, from the steelworkers to the stockbrokers, can a country seemingly divided find a way to come together? Join Brian Williams on the road to the inauguration, reporting America's story. A special series next week on NBC Nightly News.
Back in this region tonight, and the question that started popping up after the scope of the human death toll became clear. Why didn't more animals die in the tsunami? Very few did. We saw only one during our time here. Some say they know exactly why. Here with that tonight, NBC's Charles Sabai.
Look at that. Oh my God. That's a huge...
And there is proof tonight this part of the world really has been permanently altered by this disaster. Navy ships navigating by GPS instruments found that out when they were ready to unload relief supplies on shore at Banda Aceh. The shoreline wasn't where it was supposed to be. The usual landmarks had vanished. The shoreline had in fact moved, and in some cases several hundred yards. This disaster changed this part of the world all right, and in more ways than one. That is our broadcast for this Thursday, January 6th, 2005. I'm Brian Williams, reporting tonight from Singapore. For my colleague Campbell Brown in New York, thank you for being with us. We'll look for you tomorrow evening. Good night.
Tonight, unbelievable images, amazing stories of courage, and what you can do to help. Tsunami, the world responds. Tonight on MSNBC.
Tom Cameron Quaid.
John Huntley. David Burke. John Chancellor. Tom Brokaw.